Hello, so my name is Kevin, and the video that you might see in a bit serves as an academic introduction to the development of cities in China. I myself am a DPhil student at Compass and found the creation of this academic video quite an interesting experience as I combined the use of multiple different programs and packages to kind of create this medium. However, much of the time was also spent towing the line between fitting information into a short video while also not generalizing too much to render what might be interpreted as a complex discussion into that of maybe one that was too simple. The video itself briefly discusses the developmental stages of Chinese cities and seeks to emphasize that although there are theoretical linear ways of looking at development, different stages can happen at different places at different times, and thus we can get a messy kind of reality of what the city actually looks like. Hope you enjoy.
Tall buildings, high densities, and lots of people. This is probably what we think of when we talk about the Chinese city today. However, 50 years ago, most Chinese cities looked like this. And although some transformed, many parts of cities in China are a mix of areas that are developed at different points in time. In that case, what is the Chinese city? In general, we can largely divide the Chinese city into 5 contemporary phases of development. Everything before 1949, the establishment of Communist China, is considered the Old Town. In old cities such as Xi'an, this is most easily identifiable by traditional city walls. The 1950s to the 1980s reflects the second phase and a time where China's economy was planned. During this period, work was tied to living space. The city was restricted to such workers and formed a quilt-like structure, with patches of workers' housing being beside relevant industries, also known as work units. The 1980s saw China shift from totally planned cities toward market-driven industrialized cities. The period also saw the end of restrictive central planning that resulted in the severing between workplace and living space, and as such city expansion pushed into rural areas. In general, cities initially grew around villages rather than demolishing them, and villages that were once upon a time on the edge of the city would therefore find themselves engulfed by city growth and form irregular patterns, known as urban villages. By the 1990s and 2000s, the Chinese economy is now in full swing, and the development of new housing estates, shopping centers, and high-tech development areas see cities grow exponentially. In the last 2 decades, as the city pushes further away from the core, development now follows infrastructure and emerges around high-speed railway and metro stations. Of course, the city doesn't develop in uniform concentric rings, and each phase of development itself comes with a wave of redevelopment of former areas, most notably in the elimination of urban villages. However, none of these steps are truly uniform, and messiness truly emerges when these phases, as they often do in cities, fall out of sync with each other. With each phase outdating the previous one, everything becomes temporary as new areas outshine the old, and suddenly we get situations of extreme contrast. Like this municipal government building, beside a big village far away from the city centre, but close to a metro station that emerges in an empty field, waiting for development to catch up. This whole transformation of the Chinese city is often visualized by the conversion of rural to urban environments and the increase from 16% of people living in Chinese cities in the 1960s to over 60% today. But as seen in the development of Chinese cities, this process, although speedy, is anything but a uniform one. This becomes even more evident and complex when we zoom out of any singular city and understand that China's own nationwide development has not been uniform. Coastal areas saw much more investment in the 1980s, and certain port cities have grown much earlier and faster when compared to inland cities. This unequal variation of development at both the national and city level defines the messiness and creates a uniquely different experience for each Chinese city. The 5 stages of development can therefore only provide us with a simplified guide of a realistically complex situation. Therefore, to ask what is the Chinese city is to first understand how messy it can truly be.